It wasn't until my mid-20s when I began publicly disclosing my true feelings about transracial adoption. Whether I was being interviewed for a story or teaching a workshop to a room full of white adoptive parents whose kids shared my same brown skin, I began saying something publicly that I never thought I'd have the courage to say. White people adopting black kids is not ideal. Black kids need representation in their lives and agency. And despite me loving my white parents and having a good childhood, a part of me still wishes that I could have been raised by black parents. Had I been raised by black people, I know that life would not have been perfect. Because no family is perfect, and every childhood is different from the next. But having been raised in a white family and in a white town, and struggling for years to fully embrace my blackness, I can't help but wonder if that part of my story would have been quite different if I had been raised by black people.
I think transracial adoptees shouldn't just assume that, oh, I'm completely full. My cultural identity is completely full because my parents are black. No, you have to remember the process of assimilation and the process of black people assimilated into a white culture, and therefore we forget that we have this rich, powerful, beautiful culture.
That's Maya Holmes, a black adoptee in her mid-20s who was adopted by a black family when she was an infant. Maya joined one of my monthly adoptee lounges, which is a virtual support group that I host for adoptees to spend time together. In talking with Maya, she both confirmed and challenged my preconceived beliefs about same-race adoption, particularly for black children. By listening to our conversation, I think you'll understand why. I'm just really thrilled, curious, excited to talk to you because I have, for so long, just felt like if I had black parents, life would have looked a lot easier. Mm-hmm. Not better, because my life, I feel like, is just great. It's fine. My parents are lovely, but I just have always felt so jealous. And I have heard you kind of say that that might not be the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you say your life would look different, do you mean you would feel more comfortable with your black identity?
I feel like I would have come into my own, to own and enjoy, love my own blackness sooner.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that probably could have been the case, but also I think I mentioned this on our adoptee lounge. Though I was adopted into a black family, my school was mostly white and my neighborhood was predominantly white. So my out-of-home experiences look like yours, right? Because I remember in your documentary, you talking about being in Washington. Is that correct?
Yes.
I know that's a very white state. Yeah. And you weren't in Seattle, Washington, right? Like you were in, was it Bellingham?
Bellingham, yeah.
Did I pronounce it correctly? Okay, yeah. So
which I'm so curious because we do a lot of work with white parents of black kids to say it's really like culturally negligent to put your kid in predominantly white spaces and white schools. And I haven't thought to reach out to black parents of black kids to also make sure they get that same messaging. So hearing that you grew up with a lot of whiteness is kind of surprising to me.
I have a lot going on. I know it's like crazy. Like I have many multiple messages, but I think the biggest thing for me, and when I think about transracial adoptees and then someone like me, is that we all, I think in a way, are struggling to find ourselves, like identity-wise.
But that's like a part of being adopted.
Exactly. And then being black as it adds another layer. Because I do think if my parents had been white, I would have been similar to you, where I would have felt like, man, I should have been in a black family. But when you think about family dynamics, right, like some people in your family might be open to talking about adoption issues, not. That's the same whether you're adopted into the same race family or not. When you talk about when's the right time to search and your family's supportiveness of searching, race doesn't play a factor in that, because I had some people who were very thrilled and I had some people who were hesitant.
But I wonder if you didn't have the just the racial barrier to get over. So in addition to, some people might be hesitant about, like me searching for my birth parents, for example, and some people were really supportive, just like yours. There was another layer of entering a culture for which they knew nothing about that
Yeah.
added like a lot of hesitancy. But I think at the same token that just because you have Black parents doesn't mean that they're going to be automatically comfortable with whatever birth family you come from.
And also, when we talk about culture, this is another thing that people don't think about. Black culture is not always the same.
It's not the same, right?
Could look different from your birth mother's Black culture. My birth mother's Black culture looks a lot different than my Black culture, even though we have the same skin color, same hair type.
Yeah.
Right? We're both African American. It looks different.
Right.
For my adoptive Black family and my birth family, it is like walking into a different culture in a way. It's weird to think about that. Like, because does that kind of make sense what I'm saying? Like,
it totally makes sense. And then like,
is not the same across the board.
Yeah.
This is not the same.
Totally makes sense. It just seems like, although Black people, Black culture is not a monolith, it is all under this same oppressive white supremacy lens from in the US. Like, so there's that, which is, so within that understanding, there's a big spectrum. And that feels light years away from the white experience in the US. That's where it feels like, yes, it's not a monolith, but we're at least still kind of on the same plane.
Right. Yeah. In that degree, yeah. Yeah. Because I could understand like a white family and they have a Black child, and then the Black child searches, and then they feel like they can't relate to their adopted child's birth parents, which your mother may have felt or may have not felt. But I do think that is a difference. But other than that, I think, like I said, Blackness looks different.
Right.
There are some very, and this may sound weird, but there are some very white Black people. You understand what I'm trying to say? And some very woke activists, nothing white, I don't want to say anti-white, but they shop at only Black-owned businesses. Powers of people. And then you have people who grew up in, Black people, upper middle class. They think they are basically white. That makes sense. And so it's just very interesting.
It's more nuanced than just being able to put like a label on it and say, this is better. Well, do you know about the position statement of the National Association of Black Social Workers from 1972? Which
they try to avoid putting Black babies with white people. And I don't see, here's the thing. When it comes to love, if you have a choice between putting a Black child in a foster care system and putting him with a white family, put him with the white family if that means them having a better life. Because because you have to remember, I'm studying to be a psychologist, so I definitely understand.
That's right.
Our identity develops. I understand that you need representation, but you also need structure. You need security. You need resources to survive. You know what I mean? And I think if it's just, I'm going to put you in a foster family that's all Black, but you're hungry, you're homeless, you struggle you don't go to the school system. But you want Black people, what does that do for you?
But what about thinking even bigger than that? Like, what if those aren't our only two choices, that the child either languishes in foster care while waiting for a Black family, or they go to a white family? What if there's more choices, which we're working on now, which is to expand the pool of available adoptive families, or include extended family into the formal adoption process sooner. Tomorrow, the next year, 2 years, 5 years, like these are the options we have. And so choosing structure and stability is preferential, even if that means a white family who neglects the child's culture. But longer term, it's not the best option, because I
No.
do feel that I had so many of my needs met, but that cultural chasm
Mhm.
is,
Lost.
yeah, huge.
Mhm.
Yes.
So if I were a social worker, right, and I was on a board somewhere and they say, what would you recommend? I would say, if there are limited numbers of Black children and you have enough Black families, choose the Black family. Because what I fear is this like white savior complex where white means better
Yes. And for
than Black
me,
families.
going to, in adulthood, I attend and teach at some adoption culture camps.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry a bit, because when you look out like at just the adoptive parents, it really
Mm-hmm.
looks like a sea of white. And then when you look at all the kids, it looks like a sea of brown and Black kids. And there are some variations of that, but by and large, it's like, what are these kids learning?
Mm-hmm. And
Even
I
if
think, right.
individually they may be with families who um, are working really hard on keeping the child's culture, but in the big picture, when you look at that, it's hard not to think that white people need to save us
Mm-hmm.
and are the adopters, and Black and brown people need saving
Mm-hmm.
and are adopted.
Mm-hmm. And like when you mentioned the adoption culture camps, right? And it's a sea of white. You have to look at the what I call sociocultural factors of why that is, right? So you have social economic status. Most African, and I hate to say it, but most African American people may not be in a financial situation to adopt. They may not know how to go through the adoption process. They may have no experience with the adoption process, because I think sometimes, especially minorities, they have the mindset of, well, I don't know about anybody who's adopted, so I'm not going to adopt, right? Or you might have people like my parents who tried for years to have a baby, and that's what motivated them to adopt. They hadn't had any prior experiences in their families of people that adopted. So I think the reason it's a sea of white people is white people know adoption well. I'm not saying all white people are rich, but they tend to have the resources that allow them to
Yeah.
see adoption as an option. You
Well,
see
I
what I'm
mean,
saying?
because of our history,
Mm-hmm.
the Black communities haven't had the opportunity to build generational wealth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, you know, decades and centuries ago, Black people can adopt. You know, we couldn't vote, we couldn't do things like that. So adopt was like, what? That's not in the picture.
Right.
But going forward, I agree with you that that needs to change, because that cultural aspect is missed. But in the way, like, I didn't miss the culture aspect, but I still feel a lot of me was empty in a way, if that makes sense.
T- Curious about why your parents chose a predominantly white setting for you.
It was more of the best school, best education, and the public school. I don't live in a bad neighborhood, but the public school that I would have gone to by the time I was ready to be in high school, it was starting to go downhill. Versus when my brother, who was 6 years older than me, it looked a lot different. Which you would think 6 years wouldn't make a difference, but it can. And so their motivation was really just put me in a college preparatory program so that I could be ready for college. It wasn't like, we want you to be around white people. They just wanted me to have the best possible education, which again means white. And that's a very unfortunate implication. But I think we still live in a society where we say a white neighborhood is safer,
Yeah.
right? White schools are better.
Right.
White parents put them in a white family because they will benefit from the white privilege, which is not necessarily true. See, I used to be jealous of you because I said, well, she benefits from white privilege, right? She can go into a grocery store and nobody will bother her because her father is white.
Oh my
When
goodness.
I go into a grocery store, my father's Black. So if they attack him, they're going to attack me, but at least you're protected. That's how I used to think. You see?
Wow. Which you're so right. I mean, I have a chapter in my upcoming book about that I
Mm-hmm.
titled White Privilege by Osmosis,
Mm-hmm.
because I did feel like
Mm-hmm.
when people saw me in a predominantly white city, they may automatically be like, whoa, who's that? Why is she here? But then when they saw me holding hands with my white parents, it was just fine. Everything washed. They were like now excited to get to know me and my family. Like, who's this little girl? I had not thought of it that way.
Because, you know, it's like when you're in a Black family, you don't benefit from that privilege. So like my parents could be driving down the street, or like I said, we could be walking down the street and holding hands, and people will be like, oh, there's more Black people.
There's a Black family. Yeah.
It's going to be like, oh, she's a cute Black baby, and look at her white parents. Oh, she must be okay. She's safe.
Which is so true. That's how it worked. But at the same time, that meant that I had to learn about Blackness later.
Exactly.
And you didn't. You got a real dose of what it means to be Black in America real soon, real early. And for me, it was like prolonged until I left the house. And then I was like, okay, this is how the world sees Black people, sees me. And I had forgotten about how I had benefited from white privilege because of my parents' proximity to me. And so I kept going through the world in the same ways, but was treated differently. And that was a shock. Like, what's happening? So that's a really unique conundrum.
It's like we have similarities, I think, but differences, but they're all intertwined. Like, it's not clear, like, oh, she's transracial, these are her issues. I'm non-transracial, and these are my issues. Like, they mix and match. Like, I learned about Blackness early, but you had white privilege and not an easier childhood, but an easier time going in public, right?
Yeah.
I developed a cultural identity, and you didn't, but I still struggled with identity.
Tell me about the identity struggles.
So, feeling like because I didn't know who I was, like I didn't know my heredity, I didn't know my history, I felt like I didn't know who I looked like, who I talked like, who my personality was similar like to. So I felt like, how can I develop who I am?
Yeah.
When I have very vital pieces of information missing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. So we're on the same plane there. Same.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by whether you're transracially adopted or not, you're still going to struggle with that. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what I meant.
Because adoption is inherent within adoption is a loss of your roots.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like when we talked about the concept of erasure, essentially, my history was erased from me, right? Like my birth mother made a decision that I couldn't keep you. I didn't have very much information for me to go off on growing up. So it was like this whole family, this whole life that I came into for like 5 seconds is now just gone. And I may or may not one day be able to find it and get pieces of information that I need for my security and for my wholeness.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, that's even worse for adoptees who have been adopted in other countries.
I mean, it just sounds like adoption is this Band-Aid solution. Whether we pair the child with someone of the same race, someone maybe of a similar socioeconomic status to what their birth family is, which that doesn't happen very often, but it's something we could look at doing. Mm-hmm. The pairing and the matching is like, it's like a Band-Aid. It covers for a little while, but it doesn't heal. Mm-hmm. And that's where adoption is tricky because it's, and I wish that maybe society would be able to see adoption in general as a loss, point blank. Mm-hmm. And any remedies after adoption are just okay. They're just so that losing our roots destroys kind of everything.
And not I think the narrative around adoption is, oh, you should be so grateful. You know, this loving family decided they chose you. They chose, that was the huge thing of me growing up, was your family chose you. Your parents chose you. And I said, that is great. That is a blessing. I grew up religious. But I think you have to remember there's still a whole part of this person that's missing and that they may never get to know. And I think the difference between me and you is that it's just amplified with you because you grew up with white people. But I think that feeling of there's this whole part of me that I may never get to know, which thankfully both you and I have, it's like that's always there no matter what your parents look like.
Yeah.
And
It's like how some people, I wrote a blog once about like, let's not compare our traumas in general. And it sounds like you're kind of saying that, like, yeah, there may be another layer of difficulty having white parents, but it doesn't alleviate the fact that there is difficulty just in general for adoptees, that loss is painful. Loss on top of loss on top of loss is painful too, but none are better than one another kind of deal.
Yeah, and I think this might be weird, but I kind of thought of like the cultural identity thing. Like there are Black people who don't identify with Black culture, and they don't, like if you go around their house, they don't have African art. They don't talk about Blackness. They're not involved with activism. So even though their skin color is Black, their cultural identity may not be developed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, even though my parents are Black, I didn't know what the Black national anthem was. And it's not that my parents didn't care about Blackness, but we just didn't talk about that. I didn't know what Juneteenth was, right? Even though my parents are Black. So I think transracial adoptees shouldn't just assume that, oh, I'm completely full. My cultural identity is completely full because my parents are Black. No, you have to remember the process of assimilation and the process of Black people assimilated into a white culture, and therefore we forget.
Right.
And we forget that we have this rich, powerful, beautiful culture that has been taken away, right? And therefore we don't benefit from it because there's so much beautifulness and power in Blackness. But just simply being around Black parents, I'm not full in my cultural identity. Is that weird?
Right. No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, you don't just assume that Black is beautiful just because you have Black parents. It still comes from what society's messaging is. Where do you stand on, the fact that there are quite a few resources for transracial adoptive families and transracial adoptees? What about for you?
There's not. And that's interesting to me because you have support groups made for you. Like I was looking for a support group and all of them were Haitian adoptees, transracial adoptees, Korean adoptees. I'm like, well, where the heck do I fit in? Because I'm Black, but I'm not transracial adoptee. I'm not from a different country.
Yes.
There was nothing for me. I felt extremely left out because I think people assume, well, she was born into a same race family, so she's good. And
she's good. Yeah. I really feel like I'm guilty of that. Like I have not spent a lot of my time, like I create resources, create for the benefit of the adoption community. And I have not spent much time thinking about same race adoptees. And I think I had that assumption that the issues that I was seeking to address just wouldn't apply.
And that's not a fault of your own, right? That's really a fault of society because we associate being in the same race as it's easier. Whites should be with whites, Koreans should be with Koreans, Blacks should be with Blacks, whatever, Latinos live with Latinos, whatever you want to think. And when you mix, oh, that's hard. right?
Yeah.
We integrated schools. That's hard, and we need to have resources for them. But
Right.
there's same race issues, right?
Absolutely.
There's adoptees who are adopted into white families and they have issues. You know, there's Asian adoptees who might be adopted into Asian families. And
And
so,
I think about in the history of adoption, that was the key early on was matching like with like.
mm-hmm,
We would match like I'm thinking 50s would match like down to the bone structure, that uh blonde hair, blue-eyed, medium bone structure would need to be matched with a baby that had that same, for the purpose of at that time thinking it would be an easier road for the adoptee if all those things matched.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, and then when reality that does seem so simplistic when that's not the problem. The problem is what we talked about earlier, being severed at the root.
mm-hmm,
And how do we the only way I think to
mm-hmm,
mitigate that is through authentic, genuine, open relationships with our biological
mm-hmm,
family members.
which you may or may not get,
Right.
right? Because, you know, it saddens me that there's no community for me to go to. Like I was so afraid to reach out to you because I was like, she's probably not going to want to talk to me because I'm not transracially adopted. Not because you're mean, but because you would know what to do with me. I was like, well, should I even try? Because again, like you said, it's that mindset of she's good and that she doesn't need any support. But I'm
There's
still adopted.
another identity that both of us could use. And I
Mm-hmm,
don't know if you do. I haven't yet, but just as a Black adoptee, I have been more prone to calling myself a transracial adoptee.
mm-hmm,
But at the same time, that does put me in this other box. How
mm-hmm.
do you refer to yourself?
I just say I'm an adopted person.
Just adopted person,
I'm
yeah.
an African American adopted. I mean, I'm just adopted, and my race is African American. I mean, I don't,
Yeah,
I
that's a
can't.
big difference, I think, because for a lot of adoptees, like there is
Mhm,
a precursor, a word before adoptee
mhm,
that holds a lot of weight. I'm Congolese. I'm
mhm,
Ethiopian
mhm,
adoptee. I'm
mhm,
transracial. And so I do see like a little bit of a gap there
mhm.
that
There's
where do you
nothing.
fit?
I don't fit any, and then that's like surprisingly been my whole life, which I think you could say too, of not feeling like you fit in the
Where do you
Black
fit?
world and not feeling like you fit in the white world, and we are on the same plate, on the same exact page, but we just live in different environments. Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's why I said in the lounge that there may not be as many differences as you realize. Because when you really break it down into pieces and when you really look at each individual part, you say, oh, I felt like that. I felt like that. Or I didn't feel like this, or maybe I did. But we all collectively can say a part of us has been erased. We're looking for something that we can't get from our environments, no matter what color they are.
Yeah.
And we all need support. But the issue is some get alienated and some don't.
The word alienated feels willful when
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I feel like your identity was more invisible to me. It
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't visible. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear same race stories unless they are white adoptees with white parents, but then it seems in a totally different realm. It feels uh, like not having that race component is a big differentiator. Do
Mm-hmm.
you know any other Black adoptees who had Black parents?
Other than my brother, no. I
That makes
literally, my adopted, anytime I've come up on, well, I take that back. I do know one, but she's in my family. Like my
Yeah,
mother, yeah, her cousin adopted, but that's it. In my,
that is so lonely. I think that is unacceptable.
that's it. And every adopted story I've heard has been Black kid with a white
White
family.
parents. How does it? do you have any, so common we hear that Black families informally adopt people in their community, people within their extended family. Do you relate to people who've been raised informally through Black adoption by Black parents?
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah.
It's a different experience still, because I think those informal adoptions usually come with more information about your roots.
Exactly.
You know, like I'm your grandma. I'm raising you, or I grew up next door to your family, so I've known them forever. So they get the information.
Exactly.
So that's a big difference.
And I used to want that sometimes. I wished that my mother had maybe put me with my aunt or put me with my grandmother so that I could have known my mother from a distance, but I would have known her. Does that make sense?
Yes.
However, would that have been a better situation for me? Maybe, maybe not. And it's just sad to me that unfortunately with the process of adoption, you lose something at the same time while another person gains something.
Yes.
That's how I always look at it. It's that the child loses their history, but the family gains a baby, a child, or children if they adopt several times. So, it's a win. It's like a catch-22, as I always say. It's a positive and it's a negative. And I think we tend to want to focus on the positive, right? Because we have the mindset of optimism, right? Oh, just think positively. You were given a better life. Be thankful, be grateful. And if you complain, then you must not be grateful, right? And I think especially within Black families, it's like you were given something, appreciate it, and don't say anything negative about it, right? And that's not healthy sometimes, because it's though it's an absolutely beautiful thing, there's still a significant amount of me that's like, I need to fill that void. And
that's the place where a support group, whether it's transracial people or not, that's a complete commonality that yes, that adoptees lost a lot. Our parents gained what they maybe have wanted for so long. But the two don't balance each other out. And so that is a conversation that I have with a lot of these groups that I run. That's the common thread. And then on top of that, the commonality of having to feel grateful, of needing to show that positivity about it, and repressing and shoving down the sadness and the loss.
And so maybe one day I could be like you, but focus on Black people who have been adopted into Black families. And so give someone that who comes after me, like me, have someone to look at. Everybody needs help. And everybody benefits from a community. Like I said, that lounge was still a powerful thing because it was the first time that I was surrounded by people who were adopted. And that I could openly, I can openly talk about it with non-adopted people, but there's just this thing that we get.
Yeah. That was the first time you've been in a room with only adoptees?
It's the first time in my life. And it's not, even though we had different stories, we all had one common feeling, and that was we needed something, a void filled in us. And I didn't have to explain why I needed that void filled. Yes. You see what I'm saying? So that's the power of adoption communities, is that you can express what you're feeling emotionally and not have to justify it.
Right.
Because when you're talking to non-adopted people, especially people that have no experience what adoption looks like, let alone the issues that come with it, you have to justify your feelings. And I think you should never have to, but unfortunately that's how it is. And so I don't care what a support group looks like. We're all adopted. Now, of course, when you separate, okay, these adoptees, that can be even more powerful, but as a collective group, I think there's something powerful about being able to express your emotions freely and comfortably and no justification needed.
I remember feeling really alone as a transracial adoptee, but in my mid-20s, I began meeting other transracial adoptees and felt an immediate bond. And I think part of the reason the connections were so strong was because we all recognized that each of us were in the process of teaching ourselves about our racial identity, because that was something that we couldn't get from our adoptive parents. But Maya challenged my preconceptions because she taught me that for her, being the same race as her adoptive parents didn't automatically fill that void that she felt. I want to thank Maya for talking with me today. And if you're a Black adoptee who was raised by Black parents, feel free to reach out to me because I'd love to hear your experience as well. If you liked this episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review, rate it, and share it with your friends and family. Once again, I'm Angela Tucker. You can follow me on Instagram at AngieAdoptee, Twitter or Facebook at The Adopted Life, or check out my website at angelatucker.com. This episode was edited by my husband, Brian Tucker. The music is courtesy of Marmoset and Artlist. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next week on The Adoptee Next Door.